Hi, my name is James and this is Other Pixel Games. Welcome to episode 1 of my coding journey. This is a general storytime style rundown of my first few weeks learning to code and working on a Zelda-like. Last time I spoke about the ups and downs of my journey so far, and since then I've actually done a decent amount of work, so let's get straight into it. Before I started coding, I wrote out a list of the things I wanted to make. Anything I could think of I added to the list. High level, I knew I wanted to make a top-down Zelda-like game, so I had to have movement, an attack, a ranged attack, enemies, etc, but I also wanted to try some things out. So I also added things like multiplayer and a dialogue system. I picked out what I thought would be a week's worth of work and got started. Now I have a lot of projects on the go and I have a limited amount of time to do them, so a week for me is about 6 to 12 hours working afternoons Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. So I started with movement. I wanted the first priority to be having a character running around so that I can build on anything else I do from there. I also made the decision not to add sprites or other nice visual assets to the game just yet. I've made sprites before and I have a vague idea of where I want to take the art style, so I could whip some up now, but I wanted to focus on the learning aspect of the project, and I was worried that making art could cloud that, make me think about it in terms of how it looked and how it might sell as a product. So with my coloured 2D shapes in hand, I started learning and developing. As I started working that first week, it turned out that I had learned something from my first attempt at making a game, as I quickly got quite a few of the basic features implemented. I got movement in, I got a simple dash ability, and I got a basic enemy without too much trouble. It wasn't until I decided in that first week to implement an interaction and basic dialogue system that I needed some help. Creating a dialogue script that lets you put in some text and it displays it on the screen one letter at a time, typewriter style, was simple enough. I just didn't know how it worked, so I needed a tutorial. And pulling that dialogue up by interacting with a single object was fairly easy as well. You basically just have the object know when you're nearby with a trigger collider, and if you're near it, you press a button and it pulls up the UI for the dialogue. The problem was that I, in my infinite wisdom, chose to use the Unity input action map system. I say that slightly sarcastically, but I do genuinely think it was the right choice. When I worked on my Metroidvania last year, I started out using Unity's old input manager, which is a much more hard-coded solution. So it was really hard to rebind controls while in game, and to use multiple control types you'd need to write a bunch of logic to support them all. The action map system lets you do most of that natively. You have something set up to run on a mouse click and you want it to work on a gamepad trigger? For the most part, no code needed. Just go to the action map and add the game trigger to the list of controls. You want to change what every control does when you go into water? Just swap the action map when you enter the water. It makes it so much easier. The problem is that 1. Most tutorials, even new ones, still use the input manager, and 2. The way I'd set up the interaction, I had to apply the button to a specific NPC, so when I pressed the button, no matter what NPC I was next to, it could only summon up that one NPC's dialogue, which led me to a little thing I learned about called interfaces. Interfaces are basically just little bits of code that you can apply to another script that says, this script will have method X in it, so other scripts can call them. This meant that so long as my character knew about the NPC, it could use its interact method. Meaning that I suddenly had a system that let me go to 2 different NPCs and use the same button to interact and call their dialogue. I would also be able to expand upon the system to allow me to interact with anything. If I wanted to open a door, the script on that door just needed to have the interact work attached to it. If I wanted to use a save point, interactable work. If I wanted to have the player go up to a clock tower, hit the button and have it turn back time, you got it, interactable work. With that problem solved and a skip in my step, I was able to move on to creating a basic attack, which I did with a quick tutorial and very little time. At the end of that first week, I had basic movement, a simple dash, a basic unmoving enemy, a basic attack, and an interaction and dialogue system. After all that, I spent some time planning what I wanted to get in next week. Something that really helped me in that first week of learning was taking the time to go back over everything I'd written with ChatGPT to confirm my understanding. I just want to take a moment to clarify, I'm not using AI to write any code, I'm using it to review, using it as a tool to verify, no different to automated testing or a spell checker. I'm a big believer in people over AI and not using generative AI, especially on paid products. In fact, I have a short coming up explaining how I use ChatGPT in a week or two, but for now, we're on to week 2. I got less done in week 2. I continued with the weapon theme and created a ranged weapon. I upgraded my dash ability so that you could dash through enemies without taking damage, simply by setting up their layers and having the player and enemy layers ignore each other's collision for the duration of the dash. I made it so that you could die, put in a super basic day-night cycle system just to understand how it worked, and did some refactoring of my code. I also made a slightly more complicated first enemy. Instead of just standing there doing nothing, I created a little guy who could follow me and deal damage when it touched me. The first version was super simple. It just moved towards me over time, but over several iterations I got it working so that it only chased me within a certain range, and not only that, but only if it could see me. I used a feature called raycasting, which really just means I point a laser from the enemy to the player, and if it hits any objects on the obstacle layer, it won't do anything. Another way I could have done this, which would have been nicer for a stealth game, would have been to add a triangle-shaped collider ahead of it, and if I moved within that zone, it chases me. This would probably be something cool to keep in mind when I have characters moving on set paths, but for now I think it's fine. With the stage I'm at now, I wanted to be able to keep everything as clean as possible, so I took my character controller script and took out anything that I could make more modular. The dash, the attacks, they all went onto their own scripts that could be referenced, so the only thing left in the controller script was the actual controls and the movement. The big thing I did this week was give up on multiplayer. Not permanently, but for now at least. The reason I tried was because after years of working on multiplayer, I have a philosophy that it's smart to get the hardest things in first. Every single multiplayer project I ever worked on at some point had to be restarted to add multiplayer, because the prototype version that had been built wasn't set up with multiplayer in mind, even though it was always the plan. So I thought it would be vaguely intelligent to get it in right at the start. Why did that plan not bear fruit? Well, that's complicated. That being multiplayer. Multiplayer is seriously complicated. I think I could have gotten it in fairly simple with a plugin called Photon, but I went down a weird mental rabbit hole. With all the talk of the Stop Killing Games movement, I had it in the back of my mind that I'd want to make sure that this game, if it ever became something, would be able to be handed over to the community if I ever stopped working on it. Or, if possible, it could be actively peer-to-peer, so it never needed someone else's servers. Unfortunately, what I learned about Photon was that it's a subscription service. Pre-launch it's fine, you don't have to pay anything so long as you've got no more than 20 people, but after you launch, it's minimum $95 a month, which, first of all, I may not even make $95 total, so I couldn't do that. But also, if I ever did want to stop working on it and stop paying that money, I'd have to rebuild the entire multiplayer system from scratch because Photon is a proprietary thing that I wouldn't be able to give away to the users. All that being said, I still considered adding Photon in just to see what it was like, but in the end, the fact that there isn't any real gameplay in there yet made me decide to hold off. Maybe in 6 months, once I've got a game that looks like a game, I'll reconsider and put it in to try it out. The high concept of the game is a multiplayer 2D Zelda after all, but for now I decided to make that future James's problem. So after 2 weeks, what do I have? I have a boxy little guy that runs around, they can make a little triangle damage zone appear with left click or right trigger, and they can fire a little dart with right click or left trigger. And they can dash through enemies with spacebar or east button, which is the circle or B button on the PlayStation or Xbox. I also have an interact system that lets me talk to NPCs and whatever else I come up with. An enemy that runs at me and damages me, the ability to die and respawn, and finally a basic day-night cycle. Like in my first week, I also made a plan for what I want to work on next week, and at present it looks like I'll be adding a hook shot and bombs. I'll make it so that you can switch between secondary abilities at a button press, and finally I want to take the enemy to the next level so that it turns to face the player, which will allow me to do much more interesting enemies in the future. I've actually been finding myself completing a lot more things I want to make fairly quickly these past 2 weeks, and I've been adding more onto the week as I needed it, so maybe next video I'll be telling you about the new magic system I've added, but for now I have a plan. If you're interested in finding out how close to the plan I keep, or if you have suggestions on how to learn to code, please like, comment and subscribe to get notified when the next video is out, and I'll see you soon.